So it's January 10th, 2021. Welcome to Podcast. My guest is returning guest, though we haven't spoken for a while, Mr. Alfred de Zayas. See if I get this right, Professor of International Law and an expert in the field of human rights. And you teach at the Geneva School of Diplomacy. Welcome, Alfred de Zayas, again.
Glad to be back.
Welcome back. Yeah, and also back from the ski piste, I understand. You're in Switzerland and you're still allowed to ski there, aren't you?
Yes, and that's exactly why we were skiing all week, because I expect the ski stations to be closed.
Yeah.
And the downside is we had minus 12 degrees, it was cold, and the restaurants on the slopes are closed.
Yeah.
The only thing you can do is get a takeout, and so you can have a warm hot chocolate or a
Okay.
Novo Maltine, but you have to have it standing outside, and you can't go in and sit down.
I'm glad to see you in good health. Last we spoke was in 2019. We did 3 conversations.
Really?
Yeah, I looked it up. We talked about Venezuela, Juan Guaido, and something's changed there. Europe doesn't see him as the rightful leader of Venezuela anymore. Did you catch that?
Yes, I did. No, it's.
But it's a different topic.
I would say the whole thing was a farce from day one.
Yeah, we talked about that in February 2019.
Not unlike the farce with Svetlana. I mean, you cannot have Svetlana declared the elected president of Belarus as Lithuania did. I mean, it's laughable.
We also
you must actually have a level of authority, level of control, so that you can say that you actually occupy that function, which neither Svetlana nor Guaido did. But let's see how it goes with our new American president, Joe Biden. And what I very much dislike is the vendetta that is going on against Republicans and in particular against Donald Trump. I find it most disgraceful of a democracy to carry out a vendetta as is being carried out now. I mean, Trump has made many mistakes. I have condemned 90% of his policies, but there's no way in the world that you can, unless he goes totally crazy in the next 10 days, but you cannot invoke Article 25 of the Constitution. At this moment, Amendment 25 doesn't apply. And
is that serious, though? Are they really considering doing the 25th Amendment? That's what you're talking about?
I've read a lot about it, and they are considering it, but they are moving forward with yet another attempt at impeachment.
Yeah, I got that too.
I find that the Democratic Party has acted irresponsibly and very undemocratically over the last 4 years. Instead of saying, okay, Hillary Clinton lost the election 2016, let's now try to reconcile the country. Instead of that, they invented Russiagate, they invented Ukrainegate, they impeached the president unsuccessfully, but they have wasted national resources and actually the wealth and the time that was simply squandered into a 4-year vendetta against Trump. It's not surprising that the Republicans are acting, shall we say, intransigently, because they don't want to accept the fact that they lost the election, as Hillary Clinton didn't want to accept the fact that she lost the election. But the mainstream media in the United States, the plutocratic media that we have, has been disinforming the American public systematically, has been actually throwing fuel on the fire. I mean, I must say the Democratic Party is acting like pyromaniacs. Do they really want the country to implode, or do we want to have a civil war? I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, the country is so polarized, and much of that polarization is not only the intransigence of Donald Trump, but it's also the intransigence of Nancy Pelosi. I have never thought in my life that I would see someone in the House of Representatives as Speaker of the House take the State of the Union statement of the President and rip it up.
Yeah.
It's in such bad taste. It is so disrespectful of the office of the President. I'm not saying Mr. Trump, I couldn't give a damn about him. I do give a damn about the office of the presidency and what we expect that office.
Rumor has it that Nancy Pelosi's laptop was stolen out of the Capitol building when that thing was overturned by the Democrats.
That would be
interesting,
extremely exciting, because we may find things out that we do not know, and I would love to have whistleblowers put it out.
Well,
as a matter of fact, whistleblowers in many ways, talking about Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden, they are really eminent human rights defenders, because they are telling us what government is covering up. Yes. They're telling us crimes and misdemeanors of government and of the private sector, which without this kind of whistleblowing would simply go on and on and on, and there would be no discussion over it. So I guess this is an introduction to
allow me
Assange saga.
Allow me to set the stage.
Saga of this.
Yeah, poor man. It is never ending. But allow me to get to the topic of this conversation, which is Assange. Although there's two things I'd like your opinion on, but one is Assange. To get back on our previous conversations, you mentioned Chelsea Manning. We talked about her in March of 2019, and then the corona crisis, if you will, hit this year or last year, 2020. One of the upsides of that is that this channel, which is not mainstream media, has exploded in size. My biggest interview is 200,000 views, but it was with Rainer Fulmich, who is a lawyer taking the PCR test, or the inventors of the corona PCR test, to court. That thing was censored from YouTube, which used to be my channel, and now my entire channel is thrown away by YouTube. So censorship
is a huge problem, and unfortunately, big tech has shown that it can be even more powerful in manipulating public opinion and in exercising censorship than government.
Exactly.
We know that the government censorship is bad. It is condemned by the Human Rights Committee. It is clearly a violation of the right to know. And it's not just a right of freedom of opinion and freedom of expression. It is the right to seek and impart information.
So Trump was removed.
And prevented. Yeah.
Trump was removed from Twitter. He moved on to Parler, or Parler, if you will. Now tonight, Amazon is going to shut down the Parler servers. The whole Parler service is going to go down tonight.
Yeah, it is absolutely shocking, and I would hope that Amnesty International, PEN International, as you know, I was president of PEN International Centre Suisse Romand from 2006 to 2009, and again 2013, 2017, so 7 years, I was president here in Switzerland. And one of our main points in the charter of PEN International is freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, freedom of journalism, freedom of the media, freedom of the digital world. And this is a frontal attack on it. And it is unacceptable. And I hope that cases will go to the European Court of Human Rights, and that we in the Human Rights Committee will receive also cases concerning the violation of the right to know.
Exactly.
Article 19, paragraph 2, as I said, of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights establishes this right to know. So if you are being censored, it's like you are taken down. So then I no longer have the opportunity to hear you. Exactly. That is a violation not only of your right, it's a violation of my right. Yeah, exactly. I have a right to know what you want to tell me. Okay. So this is something that should be tested in the courts in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands applies the covenant on civil and political rights directly. So you can go to the Dutch judge and invoke not just Dutch legislation, you can invoke Article 19 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and say that your right to know, my right to know, is being violated by Twitter, by Amazon, and the government has to do something about it.
Okay. I have a question on Dutch law, and that extends on what you just said. So I want to not go into that right now, but after we talk Assange.
No, we'll go into the PCRs later. Yeah. I've been looking into it.
But just to answer what you just, yeah, exactly. So bear with me. To answer what you just said, we have taken the Dutch state to court already over censorship by big tech. We have taken Google and Facebook to court already in the Netherlands over their censorship. Situation is that our Minister of the Interior has made statements on national television saying, well, I would like to, in my words, I would like to censor, she said, these fake news channels. However, I can't do that being government. I mean, there's vertical laws saying that you're protected from government censorship. So I will look into different approaches. Now, big tech is serving my Minister of the Interior by doing the censorship for them. Now, our judge has ruled that a Google, a Facebook is allowed to censor channels away because freedom of expression or freedom to find information is not a horizontal function.
Come to the Human Rights Committee and present a case because you've made an effort to exhaust domestic remedies. Domestic remedies have not given you a remedy, has not given you the opportunity of reestablishing your right to know. Come to the Human Rights Committee. You can also go to the European Court of Human Rights, but the Human Rights Committee is likely to be faster. And my colleague, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression, that is the former director of Amnesty International, Irene Khan. Irene Khan from Bangladesh, who has been professor at various universities. She is now, for 6 months now, the new rapporteur on freedom of expression. She should get all of this information as a complaint against Amazon, against Google, against Twitter, and also against the Netherlands for not vindicating, for not defending your right to know.
Exactly. Okay, we will do that. Thank you for that. Now, the second topic of this conversation that I want to touch upon after we do Assange is what we have now currently in the Netherlands. This Friday, so this is recorded on a Sunday, so 2 days ago, a judge ruled in favor of the Dutch state. Now, the Dutch state says to its citizens, hey, if you're abroad and you want to take a plane back home, before you board the plane, you have to present that carrier a negative PCR corona test result. If you do not, because you don't want that invasive medical procedure, or you can't find a test, or you can't find a recent test because it may not be older than 72 hours, you're not allowed to board the plane, you're not allowed to return home. If the test turns out positive, even though you're not sick or not infectious, you're not allowed to return home with that plane. Now, I'm setting the ground here. I don't respond to this just yet. We will talk about the Assange situation and then we'll move into this PCR test requirement in the Netherlands, if you will. Mr. de Zayas, we talked about Assange a couple of times. You have visited him in the Ecuadorian embassy at least once. I saw the picture that you sent me last time we spoke. Now, last Monday, the judge in London ruled that he is not to be extradited. To set the stage, how would you summarize the judge's ruling last Monday?
I consider it a frontal attack on the rule of law. a frontal attack on established principles of international law because she has actually copped out. It is a disgrace of a judgment. Instead of addressing the issues are press freedom, the public interest in the exposure of government misconduct, the prohibition of political offense extraditions, the absolute principle, the jus cogens, peremptory international law principle of non-refoulement, the U.S. failure to provide fair trials to national security defendants. Chelsea Manning, classical example. I mean, these are the issues that had to be decided. And what did this judge do? Dismissed all of those issues. Now, she made a blah, blah judgment about humanitarian concerns because the man's mental state is such that it's a danger that he might commit suicide. If he gets extradited, he's going to be subjected, no doubt, he would be subjected to cruel and unusual treatment and punishment. And because of that, he should not be extradited. She has not addressed the shocking dossier that here a man has been subjected to arbitrary detention for 10 years. He's been subjected to a vicious, absolutely vicious, against all rule of law principles, persecution by government with the collusion of 4 governments: the United States, the United Kingdom, Sweden, and Ecuador. I mean, it is inconceivable that with a absolutely false, fake news situation of rape, it was never rape. It was never a question of rape in Sweden. The 2 women both said that it was consensual sex. It's just that they didn't want to use a condom. But in any event, this thing was a frame-up. It was planned. And my colleague, Niels Meltzer, the rapporteur on torture, has taken up the case. And he's really studied it thoroughly. And he is shocked beyond description at seeing 4 countries ostensibly committed to the rule of law, corrupting the rule of law, participating in what we call these days lawfare, actually misusing the administration of justice to persecute a whistleblower. Now, here we have a situation of torture. It's very much in the mandate of Professor Niels Meltzer, because, first of all, Assange, and this is in the public interest, Assange disclosed torture by the United States in Iraq and in Afghanistan. So here there's a matter, if there is torture, there's an obligation under the Convention Against Torture. The United Kingdom is a state party to that. There's an obligation of the United Kingdom to investigate these things, because torture was committed not only by the United States, but also by the United Kingdom, by Australian soldiers, by other members of NATO. And so there's a positive obligation imposed by the Convention Against Torture to investigate. But it's not just that. It's the fact that Assange has been subjected to a kind of psychological terror, state terror, by the United States, by the United Kingdom, by Sweden, by Ecuador, that has had a horrendous impact on his mental health, on his physical health. And so that's, again, something that falls within the domain of Professor Niels Meltzer. And then the last point, of course, is clearly if he were to be extradited to the United States, which I don't see happening, because I don't think the United Kingdom would dare do that in the light of England's obligation to observe the Convention Against Torture and the obligation to observe the European Convention on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. So this case would immediately go to the European Court of Human Rights. But the man would then be kept all the time in a maximum security prison in solitary confinement, so that his mental condition will continue to aggravate. And of course, what they all want is, why doesn't the man finally die? I mean,
exactly
just get rid of him.
If we can...
Let's hope that we create conditions that he either commits suicide in Belmarsh, or that he goes totally bananas.
Or just dies. I mean, heating is off in Belmarsh for the second time. He's been sent blankets by his family, by his fiancée, which do not arrive. So he's still being tortured. And from the looks of it, it would... No, you don't go into motive, but I feel there would be state parties that would rather see him die in Belmarsh than have to discuss extradition. Hang on. You mentioned Niels Meltzer. I interviewed him as well. And he said, yeah, I'm the rapporteur on torture, but my mandate is not so that I can enforce an investigation or action taken. I can just address the United States or Sweden or Ecuador or United Kingdom.
Which he has done.
Which he has done. And hang on. Yeah, fair enough.
Courage.
But the response he's gotten is none, or, well, we see things differently. And then that's end of discussion for his mandate, basically. So, but I want to stick to these court proceedings last week and not move into that part. I interviewed the current editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, Christian Rafnsson, on November 3rd last year on the trial proceedings that took place in September. So the extradition case was being presented in September. And he said that in his assessment, it was to be considered a mistrial with the overwhelming evidence in favor of Assange. Now, there's two sides to that. One is the evidence that you just gave, the whole house arrest, if you will, the political asylum in Ecuador that he got, the allegations of rape and all the other things. Clearly, and the eavesdropping, the listening in on him in the Ecuadorian embassy, all these things. And he wasn't allowed to, I can go on and on. He wasn't allowed to talk to his lawyers. That's mistrial. But so that's one part of things that the judge should have taken into account. But Christian Rafnsson also said...
Matter of fact, the fact that she didn't shows to me how political this case is.
Exactly.
And how much politics dictates the judgment. This is a political judgment. This has nothing to do with British law or with human rights law, or with principles of international law. Here, quite clearly, you're seeing lawfare conducted brutally, viciously, against an individual who's actually done you a service, he's done me a service, he's done every American and every world citizen a favor, by uncovering how governments commit war crimes and crimes against humanity in total impunity.
Yeah, fair enough. That's true. So hang on. I want to wrap up on. I'm moving into a question based on the interview that Christian Rafnsson did in November. So he said it's to be considered a mistrial. Well, the judge didn't go into that, to my understanding, in her ruling. The other thing that Rafnsson said is, okay, so you have these allegations, and the reason that the United States wants Assange basically is him exposing the war crimes committed by the biggest and the most powerful army in the world in Iraq. So that's the core of the allegation, and the overwhelming evidence that the defense provided should get him free immediately. Now, the judge did go into that, and she dismissed pretty much everything the defense had said.
Exactly.
So I was watching. Hang on. No, hang on. I want to go into question there. So I was observing that ruling, reading up on that, and the people with me doing a live broadcast there. We were very losing our faith and say, okay, she's going to lose. And then at the final statement that she made there is the health argument as well. If he were to be extradited, he might commit suicide in an American jail, so he's not to be extradited. That came as a complete surprise. Now, that health condition situation has been part of the Lori Love case also. In an appeal, he was not extradited. So my question to you is, does that play a role in the judge using that health argument here? Or what's going on with not extraditing him based on solely that health argument?
Well, it is a convenient excuse not to go on the other issues that are the real issues to be decided by the judge. I mean, she has failed in her responsibility. She has failed against her oath as a judge. I mean, she has allowed herself to be used. Maybe someday, if not WikiLeaks, some other whistleblower will tell us exactly what happened and what connections there were from the British Foreign Office and the United States State Department that influenced that judgment. But here, what I find crucial to understand is that even this judgment that can be used to say, oh no, we shouldn't be extradited because of the humanitarian aspect, et cetera, that actually, maybe there's a strategy behind it. First, you kind of pacify those who do not want to see Assange extradited. So at least he won't be extradited immediately. Then you still stretch it out for a year and a half in another proceeding. Maybe he dies in that period. And maybe at the end of the day, the United States, this new wonderful President Joe Biden, gives assurances to the British government that he will be treated well, that he will not be subjected to any kind of torture or ill treatment, etc. And then because it's Joe Biden and not Donald Trump, then the Bojo will say, okay, fine, here you go.
That will be my question. So United States has already said they will appeal this ruling, so they don't agree and they want to seek a higher judge. How do you appeal against this ruling then? Just by saying we got a 5-star prison and he's not going to die there? Is that their argument?
Well, that's part of the argument. The argument is that no, we will treat him well, and it's not true that we torture anybody in American prisons, et cetera, et cetera. They will provide all sorts of blah, blah arguments. And if the court is in bad faith, and the court is in bad faith, the court has shown that it is in bad faith, they will stretch it for a year and a half. And after a year and a half, they will then say, we are satisfied that the assurances given by the United States are valid and in good faith, so we will grant extradition. Then, of course, he would have to go to the European Court of Human Rights and appeal against his extradition.
Now, what Rafnison said is the content of the case and the defense against that, they must have. I mean, there was overwhelming evidence. These are his specific words. Overwhelming evidence that Assange should be let free. The judge.
Well, I asked for his release when the working group on arbitrary detention came out with its judgment in January 2016, finding that Assange was the victim of violation of multiple rights and that he should be immediately released. I issued a press release supporting the judgment of the working group on arbitrary detention, asking both the United Kingdom and Sweden for once to respect the United Nations, to respect a judgment of the working group on arbitrary detention, and to give a good example to the rest of the world. Because we're always complaining that countries in the third world disregard judgments of the United Nations. Well, here's the chance to show that they really mean it the United Nations.
Did you get an answer?
That they want to implement decisions, even if they don't like the decision. Of course, no reaction, whatever. I ended up issuing 3 press releases, and now the statements by Professor Niels Meltzer, I endorse every word of those statements, and they are not having the necessary effect, partly because A, the mainstream media has not given them sufficient attention. The mainstream media has failed in calling for the release of Assange. And essentially, the mainstream media is an echo chamber of the Foreign Office and an echo chamber of the State Department.
Now, let's say you were doing the defense for Assange. I mean, he was denied bail on Wednesday. What are the steps that Assange defense take now, and how should they proceed?
Well, I suppose that they will appeal a decision not to grant bail, and bail is usually granted in 99% of the cases. I mean, there's no justification to deny bail to someone who has been so physically and mentally weakened, who cannot, plan an escape or anything of that nature. Besides, with modern technology, if you put a ring around his arm and a ring around his legs that constantly indicate where he is, or if you plant as many policemen outside his house in London as they were outside
the embassy.
The embassy. Yeah. When I went to the embassy, I had to go buy them. Yeah. It cost millions to do that. Just proof that it is an arbitrary detention and it is perceived as detention.
Now, bail was denied because Assange, when he was under house arrest, broke his house arrest and sought and got political asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy. Now, it is my understanding that
he should have at the time.
Yeah, hang on.
He was clearly framed.
Yeah,
I mean, if you are framed and you know that you risk being kidnapped and taken to the United States, people seem to forget that there was such a practice called extraordinary rendition. Extraordinary rendition was state kidnapping. These people that the United States wanted to send to Guantanamo were simply kidnapped. So Assange could very easily have been kidnapped in London and sent to Guantanamo. And he chose, and rightly so, because at that time Ecuador had a democratically elected president who actually believed in human rights and believed in asylum, and he granted him asylum in the embassy in London. So but after the 10 years of Rafael Correa, came in a traitor, Lenin Moreno, who has he gets elected to continue on a platform to continue the policies of Rafael Correa. Because he was supposed to be the left-wing candidate campaigning against the right-wing candidate who was Guillermo Lasso. So he wins the election on Rafael Correa's platform. And then he completely turns around. Yeah. So, I mean, Lenin Moreno is a turncoat. He has completely betrayed those people who elected him president. And the first thing, or not the first thing he did, but one of the first things he did was to turn on Assange and then to strip him of Ecuadorian citizenship because he had been granted Ecuadorian citizenship, and then strip him of asylum.
But so now, with all the knowledge that we have, with the position of Sweden back then, and the way the Crown Prosecution Service has worked together with the Swedes through investigative journalism by Stefano Morici, we learned all those things. So Assange was right to seek asylum, and Ecuador was right to grant him asylum. My question was, And that will be then the last question on the Assange case, and then we move into the Dutch situation with the PCR test requirement. But the last question would be, if you get political asylum, and rightfully so, and we know now that it was rightfully so. He was totally correct in his assumption that he would be kidnapped and sent off to America. That cannot be a violation of house arrest then. It cannot be a violation of bail. It cannot be presented by the judge as he has jumped bail last time, can it?
Of course not. But I mean, the problem is that
so what's the rule of law in UK then?
Yeah. I mean, here you have to understand the Assange case as more than just that. The Assange case, in a way, is just evidence of a breakdown of the rule of law in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Sweden. It's evidence of the penetration of the state into the administration of criminal justice. I mean, the documentation laid out by Professor Niels Meltzer on the pressures brought by the United States on Sweden to reopen the so-called rape case and not to interview him, because that's one of the amazing situations. If you have a case of rape, well, make an indictment. They never made an indictment because they didn't have enough to make an indictment. If you cannot make an indictment, then at least hear Assange. Assange was always cooperative. He himself, when there was a question of sexual harassment or whatever, he immediately cooperated with the Swedes. The Swedes would not interview him. The Swedes would not interrogate him because they wanted to keep him in limbo and to extend the matter. And at the end of the day, they had to drop it because there was nothing to it.
So if this is the situation and Assange defense makes an appeal to get bail granted to Assange, what are his chances for bail then? I mean...
Well, he should invoke, of course, Article 9 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and he should invoke the fact that it's only in very, very limited situations that you can deny bail, especially here where it would be so easy with the technical possibilities of today to put a ring around his arm or around his leg that would constantly monitor his movements.
But would a higher judge rule in his favor, or what are his odds, or shouldn't we have that discussion?
Again, I'm not looking into the glass ball. I mean, I have no respect for the judicial system in the United Kingdom anyway. It is very corrupt, as it is in my country, in the United States of America. So, I mean, I would not want to be in Assange's situation. And what I would like to see is international solidarity. I think an appropriate reaction to the issue of not granting him bail and to the issue of not wanting to go into the substantive issues of the defense would be for 20 countries, 40 countries, 100 countries offering Assange asylum. Mexico has already done so.
Yeah.
So I would like to see Mexico and Bolivia and South Africa and India and Indonesia offering Assange asylum. Of course, the country that should take him back is his own country. I mean, Assange is Australian, and Australia is a rogue country. Imagine how Australia has thrown him before the bus. I mean, how Australia has let him out in the cold. I mean, it's amazing that this man, being an Australian, having a right to be diplomatically protected by his country of nationality, and Australia does nothing for him. I mean, if he were to return to Australia, I mean, Australia has also an extradition treaty with the United States. They could run this thing over again.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, the whole thing is actually an international disgrace. It's a breakdown of respect for law, and it's a breakdown of accountability. Because what is here behind the whole thing is intimidation. The United States and the United Kingdom and Sweden and everybody who is on this boat together, what they are doing is to intimidate any potential whistleblower, to say, don't you dare ever disclose our crimes, because we will prosecute you until the death. I mean, this is the chilling effect, and that is the meaning of the Assange case. So as much as we always talk about accountability and let's have the International Criminal Court prosecute all of these African ousted leaders and these African military figures, etc., it's just hypocrisy. It's double standard.
But you know, we're going to leave the Assange topic there. But on the flip side of that, it's not working. I mean, over the last year, the alternative media channels, such as my own, they're exploding in size, and the people are looking at that content. So people aren't being intimidated. So, and also, we're going to move into the PCR test in a moment. So the corona test that everybody takes in the world is based on a PCR mechanism. So PCR is a technique, and if you design a test with that, then well, you can find stuff. I mean, that's what that technique is. Now the design is flawed, according to 20 academic researchers who volunteered a retraction paper to retract basically the PCR test that's being used all over the world. So those
you have a false positive, and you also kind of have a false negative.
Exactly.
On the other hand, I'm not against the PCR test, except that the issue at hand is whether you can keep Dutch.
Yeah, hang on. Yeah, I'm going to move in there. So hang on. Bear with me. So those researchers that are challenging the validity of the PCR test for the coronavirus, they are whistleblowers in their own right. So there's hope there as well. So there's all kinds of things happening. Just a moment ago, at the end of the Assange discussion, you said you have no faith in the rule of law in the United States, no faith in the rule of law in the United Kingdom. Well, let's move into the Netherlands now. In the Netherlands, if you're abroad, you have to undergo a invasive medical procedure like the corona PCR test. And if you cannot show a negative result, you're not allowed back in your country. Now, you are a professor of international law and an expert on the field of human rights. I feel I'm not, but I feel my international law and human rights are being violated by my own country. What's your assessment of this situation in the Netherlands?
Well, it is customary international law that every state is obliged to take back its own citizens. I mean, you cannot quasi-exile your citizens by denying them entry into the own country. Of course, when they arrive in the Netherlands, they can be put into quarantine.
Fair enough.
Or they can be given the PCR test in the Netherlands, but not ahead of time. They do have a right to return. As far as international law, international human rights law, you have Article 12 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 12, paragraph 4, very clear. Every citizen has a right to return to his own country. So that actually excludes the idea of exile. But Article 12 can be derogated from in a situation of national emergency that threatens the survival of a nation, which is certainly not COVID. I mean, we're not there yet. But in order to derogate from Article 9 or Article 12 or Article 19, you would have to first show that there is that kind of a national emergency that endangers the survival of the nation as such, pretty high threshold. And you would have to notify it to the Secretary General of the United Nations. It's not just something that you do at home and say, we're going to derogate, we have a right to derogate. You have to justify and you have to notify it. And then you have to show that it is a temporary measure that will be removed as soon as the emergency is over. So I think that here the Dutch legislators are going way beyond what is proportional to the danger. I mean, a citizen has a right to come back to his country, point final. I mean, it's an extremely rare situation in which you could deny that. You must satisfy a very, very high threshold of national emergency to allow that.
Okay, let me describe the legal proceedings that took place over the last week and a half. So there was an actual family in Zanzibar, and they had their flight booked back, and they said, well, we cannot, in our physical situation that we're in, undergo that test and show that negative result, even if we wanted to. And they took the Dutch state to court through their lawyer in the Netherlands. Now that judge, so there was an emergency proceeding, right? Because they wanted to fly back a couple of days later. So it was a quick proceeding. That judge wrote his verdict in the night. And I'm not making this up. I'm going to explain how that went later on in this explanation. So he wrote it in the night, the day before New Year's Eve. And he presented his verdict on December 31st at 11 a.m. And he said, these people are allowed to back into the Netherlands. But he went further. He had his verdict ready and he said, well, the Netherlands is out of line. And because of because of these reasons, the ones that you just mentioned also. So he made a proper verdict. Now that triggered something in the Netherlands apparently, because our political leaders, our ministers, over the weekend changed the law. And by ministerial decree or whatever the English translation is, on Sunday night they changed the law and they said, well, we have a new law now, you still have to present that negative PCR test, so we're going to continue that measure. The Dutch state was, and this family had already flown back, so they were back in the Netherlands on the Monday morning. So for this family that did that first court proceeding, oh, I lost my own image. Hang on, I'm back. My camera switched off here for a moment. So this family won the case against the state, which is pretty much without a president. So that was cool. They took the state to court again, but now not for this family, but for 30 families abroad and all over the world. Who
would be well advised to challenge the new law.
Exactly, that's what they did.
As contrary to the obligation of the state to take its citizens back, and number two, in violation of Article 12, Paragraph 4 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
So they took the state to court on the Tuesday. So that was last week's Tuesday. And it was the same judge. Now that same judge, after this a new emergency procedure, said, well, remember last week, December 31st? I mean, I was up all night writing my verdict. I'm not going to do it this time. So I was pretty sure about what I was going to do last time. But now I have to think about it. Give me a couple of days. I'll get back to you later on in the week. That judge last Friday said, well, no, actually, I'm going to rule in favor of the Dutch state. And you cannot call it exile because, I don't know, I can't translate it into English. But the word exile was actually mentioned in the verdict. And also the word quarantine was used in the verdict. He made an example saying, well, there are quarantine requirements sometimes. So if you compare it to that.
Once you are back in the country. But you cannot be prevented from returning to the country.
So that's what's happening now. So what should we do?
Take it up to the European Court of Human Rights. Take it up to the Human Rights Committee.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I wonder whether this judge was also placed under the same kind of political pressure that, say, the judge in Sweden, in Stockholm, was put in the Assange case, or the judge that made the judgment now in London in the Assange case. I mean, I don't put it past the government to have actually brown-beaten the judge who made that decision, that correct decision of the 31st of December.
Now, let's say I'm a healthy individual. I'm in Portugal or I'm in Finland. Let's say I'm getting myself this PCR test. Let's say it's negative. Well, if it's written in Portuguese or in Finnish, I'm not allowed to present it to the carrier, to the airplane, the people flying me back home. Sorry for that. That's bad translation failing there. Let's say I do have that negative PCR test. I'm still not allowed to board because it's written in Finnish or in Portuguese. Now that's a technicality. Let's say it's a positive test that I get back. I'm healthy. I'm not sick. I'm not infectious, but it's a positive test because the test is flawed. What am I to do when I'm in Portugal or in Finland? I could buy a car, drive back.
That is the reason why they're consulates. You would expect the consulate in Lisbon or the consulate anywhere else to provide prompt assistance, prompt and effective assistance to Dutch citizens abroad. That's why you have consulates. And if it costs money to translate the PCR results into Dutch, then it should be the consulate that pays for it, because it is the government that is making this imposition. I mean, a normal individual wouldn't go and do a PCR test unless he has some kind of symptoms, unless he's been in contact with people who have COVID and says, I think it's prudent to do the PCR. But I find the government is not fulfilling its obligation vis-a-vis the citizen if the government does not come forward and facilitate it for the citizen so that he can return home. I mean, I think that here, again, there's a certain instrumentalization in this affair, as I see so much more and more, actually, the instrumentalization of domestic law and international law for other reasons. I think that this law has one purpose: intimidation. Exactly. The idea is, don't you dare go abroad. I mean, we don't want you to go abroad, point final. That, I think, is the purpose of the legislation. We're going to make it so difficult to you to come back to the country that you won't take the risk and you won't go out to Zanzibar, or you won't go back, go out to Lisbon. But that is in bad faith. I mean, if that's what the government wants to do, then they should say so in so many words, but not create, shall we say, an ambiguous situation. And people do have to travel sometimes.
They also make they also make the argument that it's people on vacation. They should have known. They could have known that these measures were coming. So it's their own. But these are people working. These are people visiting dying family members. These are people that are abroad for all kinds of reasons.
All kinds of reasons, which are legitimate. And people also have the right to take vacation. But in any event, I'm not saying that people should go out and take vacation. I'm saying that let people make their own decisions. I mean, that's why we are free men and free women.
Yeah, well, we're not anymore.
We're responsible, but the government has to be responsible too. The government has to be transparent. The government should not manipulate information, should not intimidate the citizen, and should use its consulates to help those Dutch citizens who are abroad in coming back home safely and in dignity as soon as possible.
Are the Netherlands setting a new precedent here? Because I feel they're the only one currently denying their own citizens entry into airplane. Do you?
Apparently, yes. I have not heard about any other country doing that. Okay. And I do not recommend it. But I mean, in order to do that, as I said, which is a violation of Article 12, Paragraph 4 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, you would have to derogate from that article. You would have to notify the Secretary General, and you would have to pass that very, very high threshold and explain why this is proportional to the danger.
So now, having done this discussion, just before we started this about the Dutch PCR test requirement, you said I lost faith in the United States rule of law and United Kingdom rule of law. If you're to make a top three, how's the Netherlands doing in violation of these things?
I would tend to think we take the cake in the United States. I mean, the violation of the rule of law in the United States has become, unfortunately, widespread. And in the United Kingdom, as a lapdog of Washington, it's also very widespread. I mean, I would like to see the Netherlands. You know that my wife is Dutch, and I love the Netherlands, and we have a lovely place in Noordwijk aan Zee. And I love to get back to my apartment in Noordwijk. But again, I can't. In any event, the only purpose to go to Netherlands is to see family, to see friends. Okay. And I'm not going to go to the Netherlands and be quarantined in my apartment. Has no sense. So, as I say, I hope that, like very often in Netherlands, common sense seems to win out. The Dutch are not as fanatical or as intransigent as Americans or as Brits can be. So I thank you for the opportunity of saying these few things in your program. And my hope is that there will be more and more people like you, and that there will be more alternative media that is actually listened to, and that is not then censored by big tech, because that is a most dangerous development, because it essentially undermines the whole concept of the right of each one of us to seek and impart information. When you go into the search engines, whether it be Bing or Ecosia or Google, there again, you have no idea the level of algorithmic manipulation. There are things that sometimes exist, and I need that document. For instance, I need a thematic report on unilateral coercive measures written by the then High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, in 2012. You write all of that in the search engine, you won't find it. Even if you write the number of the document, A/HRC/19/33, you won't find it either. They've hidden it somehow. You finally get it. Unfortunately, you'd say, oh, heavens, go to the website of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. You wouldn't believe how bad that website is. But in any event, you would think that because it is in the website of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, it would simply be picked up quickly by the search engine. I am convinced, because that thematic report is dynamite, that you don't get it because there's an algorithm that is blocking it. So it doesn't come up in the search results. Yeah, we get all sorts of other crap, but not that.
We started this conversation, we're going to end here. We started this conversation by you mentioning the American situation with Trump and being succeeded by Biden shortly. I interviewed Robert Epstein on the United States elections in 2016, and he said Google was massively influencing not just the American elections, but elections in all kinds of countries. And he's investigated that, and he's proven that in an academic and scientific research setting. And so it's proven that Google manipulated. I wouldn't have imagined that they would even manipulate it to the extent that you just made an example of. Oh yeah, but I wouldn't hold it against them, and we now know that that's going on.
But again, it should be condemned. I mean, I have written to the new UN rapporteur on freedom of expression, signaling that, because there is a right to know. And if we don't get that information, our capacity to work democratically on the basis of evidence is being sabotaged. And I would like to see more proactive action on the part of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, demanding that the private sector abide by democratic principles. But more and more, big tech is showing that it can actually manipulate public opinion. And they certainly did so in the 2016 elections. They certainly did so now in the 2020 elections. They are doing so now with regard to the last 11 days of Trump. I find it a disgusting vendetta against an outgoing president. As I said, I am no friend of Trump. And as I said in another interview, I'm very happy that Trump lost, but I am not at all happy that Biden won. Why? Because neither one is committed to democracy. And because whether the Republican Party or the Democratic Party is in power, they actually converge on essentials.
Yeah, exactly.
They are both militarists, unilateralists, exceptionalists, and when it really comes down to it, they want to make sure that the establishment, meaning the military industrial complex, the financial complex, Wall Street, that they all remain in control. Yeah. So the idea is the 1% should continue controlling your fate and my fate, and let's keep it this way, that the rich remain rich and the poor remain poor.
And Alfred de Zayas, let's make sure that you and I stay friends and you stay a friend to this program, and we keep commenting on it as long as big tech allows us and good health allows us. Thank you for being my guest.
Let's hope for a better 2021 to all your listeners.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Niet normaal maken wat niet normaal is.
Liegt niet. Every nation in every region now has a decision to make.
You think I'm joking? Predator drones. You will never see it coming.
Laat staan dat ik kan ingaan over vuur.